Welcome to the Dark Ozarks. We are exploring the English roots of ghost lore in the Ozarks and a few other legends. The Dark Ozarks podcast is now available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, or about any other podcast platform. So what does Shakespeare have to do with our favorite Ozark ghost stories?
I think it comes down to one simple question, Lisa. To be or not to be? Well, for the ghost, that is.
Okay, Melancholy Prince. It sounds like there is something rotten in the state of Denmark.
Oh, but perhaps 'tis worse in Scotland. By the pricking of my thumb, something wicked this way comes, and the boggarts and apparitions that followed settlers to the New World and settled down comfortably in the Ozarks.
We will discuss how Elizabethan ghosts found their homes in the Ozarks. But first, we want to invite everyone to like, follow, etc. Dark Ozarks on Facebook, Instagram, here on YouTube. Plus, we encourage you to follow the podcast. While you're over on Facebook, you can subscribe to the private Dark Ozarks subscribers group. Why, you may ask? Well, it does have a small subscription fee, but you receive exclusive content, behind the scenes info you don't find anywhere else. It also helps bring more original content to Dark Ozarks. You can click the subscribe button on the page and you'll have to log in since there's a payment. We appreciate everyone.
And now you can get Dark Ozarks t-shirts for sale at www.darkozarks.com and also paranormalsciencelab.com.
We encourage everyone to check out Always Buying Books in Joplin, Missouri, in person and online on Facebook, and their website, alwaysbuyingbooks.com, for all of your reading needs, including a large section on the paranormal, history, and more, not to mention the building's haunted. Tell Bob and Elise we sent you.
We also want to thank Beard Engine Brewing Company in Alba, Missouri. Beard Engine Brewing is the only English-style brewery in Missouri and was twice named Missouri's best brewery by the Missouri Brewers Association. Great beer and food in a historical building with a noir past, and also the place is haunted. Tell Nate and Tiff that we sent you.
So, Shakespeare and the Ozarks, not two things that you typically hear in the same sentence.
Very, very true. And I really like the substrate of that, because it speaks to the original European settlers who came into the hills and built what we now think of as Ozarks culture. And there are ties in so many ways that resonate to the current day, but they're often so inured within the social framework that people don't necessarily think of them as English or Elizabethan or associated with Old England. You often see the same with Appalachia, and the fact that some portions of Appalachian and possibly Ozarkian dialects are even closer to quote unquote the Queen's English that was spoken by the upper strata of England during that era than we might imagine. And I find that particularly fascinating because, of course, in the latter half of the 19th and into the 20th centuries, those with hillbilly dialect were maligned, were marginalized by modernist society.
Very true. And the irony, though, is that when we're specifically talking about ghost stories and that kind of lore, it's easy to imagine that the Elizabethan influence basically affected the wealthier class and just the more landed gentry as they came over, which were a small minority of those that actually moved on into Appalachia and the Ozarks. But that's not really true either, because the motifs and the way that the whole concept of ghosts and the supernatural was treated by those learned bards such as Shakespeare and Marlowe, etc., was the same lore that had been shared by all of English society for several hundred years at that point. So all of this would have been familiar to any of the settlers coming in, no matter what their station in life was.
I appreciate that so much. And something that often gets lost in the process is that the English language really was still being codified, and this commonality throughout the strata was strange. It just, in terms of its communicative structure, was strangely egalitarian. We were coming out of that shift from the point where, quote unquote, the lower strata were speaking Anglo-Saxon, we're speaking, a Germanic dialect, and the upper class was speaking Old French. Yes. Following the Norman invasion. And there was something really incredible that happened at this juncture point of the late 1500s, under the reign of Elizabeth and into the reign of James, where there became a common English tongue. And what was so immense about that from a poetic and a cultural standpoint is that not only was there now a common tongue, but we had an uncommon bard who understood the people in incredible ways, and was able to create popular culture with what is really just comparatively a handful of plays.
Very true. And while now, looking back, many people, especially when they're studying Shakespeare, think, oh, this is stodgy, this is hard to read, I'm having a hard time with the language, etc. Ironically, this was the forging of modern English, and Shakespeare alone coined over 2,000 words that we use every day.
Yes.
Not to mention countless other phrases. So, yeah, there's a reason he is referred to as the bard for sure. And you mentioned James, which I think is interesting too, because I think that a lot of people tend to think that stories of the supernatural, ghost tales, are rather pedestrian, particularly when we look at them in terms of these, sort of revered writers and so forth from that time period. But that's not the case. James I actually wrote a ghost story himself.
And I of course, for people who don't know, James I is Queen Elizabeth's nephew, and James was Scottish, and was the Scottish James VI before.
Well, technically second cousin. Second cousin.
Okay.
Because Mary's mother was a sister to Elizabeth's father.
Okay. Yeah. For some reason, I always thought she was a nephew.
Yeah. No. Second cousin.
Okay. But there was of course, a great deal of interest in the supernatural throughout the strata, and just certainly things that we would potentially think of as superstition today, possibly, although in our line of work not so much, was really regarded as worthy of study from literally the top down, from James I down.
Yes. And ironically, since James had such an influence on the English Protestant Bible in the English-speaking world, the fact that he was interested in the supernatural is interesting, because in some ways that is at odds with sort of the dogma of the Protestants of the day, which had to be observed and affected the literature, which still actually sort of forms the narrative that modern American society talks about ghosts. So we're going to delve into all of that more in the long format, which will be uploaded here on YouTube tomorrow. So as well as delving into a few of the tales in the Ozarks that kind of illustrate these things. So we appreciate you all, and don't forget to check out upcoming events and merchandise at darkozarks.com and paranormalsciencelab.com. And thank you again to Always Buying Books and Beard Engine Brewing Company for helping bring the Dark Ozarks to everyone.
And on the next episode, we're going to be discussing dark winter ghost stories and much more. Catch the Dark Ozarks podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and other podcast platforms. Thank you to everyone. And remember,